Welcome back to Don the Developer podcast, where we help aspiring web developers get jobs and junior developers grow. In this episode, we're going to continue our series exploring coding adjacent positions and positions that aren't like traditional front-end, back-end software engineering, and exploring different types of software engineering positions. So we're focused on WordPress today. How do you become a WordPress developer? What is a WordPress developer day to day? What does it look like? Is it fun? Does it suck? We're going to dive into it. But I brought on Micah with me today. He's going to go ahead and share his experience. We're going to dive into some questions. Micah, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right. So who are you? Talk a little bit about your experience as a WordPress developer.
Well, let's see. I always like to go a little bit further than just when I started WordPress. So I had a company where I had a lawn care company I ran for 12 years and decided that I want to make a switch. So I made the switch to learning and becoming a WordPress developer. To be honest, I didn't think I had what it took to do that at the time and make any kind of money. Turns out I was pretty good at it. So started picking up customers and then eventually working with some other people, and then getting into more enterprise level work, and then landed a job at a hosting company. So right now that's where I'm at. I'm at Bluehost. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Why WordPress?
Well, so when I was first toying around with different technology, I tried to build a website for my lawn care company when I had that. It ended up being a really nasty looking HTML website without a whole lot of design thought put into it. Had a nice Microsoft clip art logo. So pretty low tech. And then I had a friend who was a designer, so he helped me spruce it up, but it was still just a basic HTML site. Then kind of on the side, I started up my own little martial arts studio, and wanted to create a website that was dynamic where people could log in and see the curriculum for their belt levels and all that kind of good stuff. So I started working just raw PHP, MySQL kind of stuff. Got that working. And then a friend of mine and his buddy, they had started up a WordPress agency and kind of introduced me to WordPress. But I had also installed Joomla and Magento and some other things. Not very impressed with Joomla. Magento, I was pretty sure you had to have a college degree to just install it. And then, it was just difficult to apply, upgrading and all that was like, go to this file, change these things, it was pretty gnarly. I think things have been moving more in the direction that WordPress had already started to go down, where, you could click a button and install a plugin, which was really nice. So that was kind of one of it was easy for me to jump into. I still felt like it was kind of hard at first because I had been doing PHP and stuff my own way. And then I had to work within a framework that, I didn't know the internals of and that kind of stuff. But I adapted and started to figure it out. So it was a bit of an interesting journey. I was completely self-taught. There were no boot camps or courses when I was doing this. So this has been about probably 12 years ago that I started.
It's a really cool self-taught story. You needed a website. It was for the martial arts studio?
Yep.
Okay. So you essentially I truly think this is a really cool way to get into coding in general. It's like you have a problem you need to solve. You realize coding is a solution or a tool to create a solution. And then you create that solution, right? And then you kind of found some interest in it and pretty much doubled down on it. I think that's, to me, I guess when you did that, you were learning WordPress. Did you feel, so what if you were just like building some random WordPress website? You're like, I kind of want to get into coding. I want to learn some tools or languages. I just want to build some random websites. Do you feel like you would have been as motivated if you weren't building a website for yourself?
Well, probably not. Yeah. I think the motivation probably would have come from just my desire to do something with coding, but yeah, I think it would have been a little bit more difficult if it weren't for the fact that I had already had kind of those little things I wanted to do and started working on them. So, yeah.
Makes sense. What kind of things do you work on right now with WordPress? Do you build, like, do you dig in deep and build themes and really get into the PHP parts of the code, or yeah, what do you do?
So right now, well, technically, work at a hosting company. So we at Bluehost, we focus on Bluehost being the best place to do WordPress. And that's for our customers, of course. But so part of what I do is try to make sure that it is the best place to do WordPress, right? So try to make it as easy as possible for people, which means we have plugins that handle a lot of stuff behind the scenes, everything from like single sign-on into your site from the hosting platform to handling caching and just being able to more easily customize things on their site. And so there's a lot of different things like onboarding flows and stuff like that we can do to help. But there's also been a lot of innovation in WordPress lately with full site editing and a lot of things that previously were only found in premium plugins and stuff like that. So a lot of that's kind of becoming free to everyone, which is great. But it also provides us some additional opportunities where, we can go in and make it even easier for people. And they get more control over different aspects of their site that they wouldn't normally have had before. So there's that. I've actually been doing a little bit of Laravel as a part of this because we've created essentially a hub where we can find out more information about the sites that we have and make sure that everybody's sites are running well. So we're using some other tools to make sure we're aware of all the WordPress issues and things that people are running into. So that's kind of the Bluehost side of what I do. And technically I'm a sponsored contributor. Bluehost pays me to actually contribute to the WordPress project itself. So that is very interesting, being able to jump into different aspects of WordPress and, help with the workflows of the editor or jump in and, write REST API endpoints for menus or all kinds of stuff. So it really there's so many opportunities to work on WordPress itself. It's a little ridiculous. But yeah, there's a lot going on there.
Okay. Yeah, you almost sound a bit like a jack of all trades when it comes to. It sounds like your focus really is just, like you said, making WordPress a little bit more accessible for people that are using it on Bluehost, and you're kind of just building internal tooling to be able to make that easier. And do you jump into any people's sites when they have a technical issue and you help solve that technical issue?
Yeah, we're actually going to be out next week in Porto, Portugal. There's a WordCamp Europe, and so we'll have a big booth out there. And one of my favorite things at these WordCamps is we actually get to sit down with customers. They come in, they're like, hey, I've got this problem. My site's not fast, or my site's doing this weird thing, or this, something weird's happening. And we'll jump in and, help out and get to the bottom of it. So, yeah, I've kind of missed that because this is like the first in-person event in 2.5 years, I think.
Yeah.
But having that like actual connection with the customers and being able to work through issues and stuff is really nice, because then, not only do you help somebody overcome a problem, but you also get to go back and be like, hey guys, we should probably change this for everybody to make it easier. So
makes sense. Okay. So you pretty much help clients of different size WordPress sites, right? That might have, I guess I kind of want to get a feel for the types of problems that happen and even what you need to learn to be able to create these WordPress sites for someone that's like an individual, like yourself, just building a WordPress site for their martial arts studio, or, someone that has, a company of 100 people that has kind of a main website that is built upon WordPress. So I guess for the people that are like, kind of just you throw up a WordPress site, you want to get an idea online, you want to get your website online for like the one-man shops. Do you feel, what are some of the, first of all, like what are some things that you need to learn to be able to do that and do it successfully? And what are some of the challenges that come up with those types of customers?
Like a small mom and pop kind of brochure website kind of thing. So 9 times out of 10, I actually, maybe a more direct example, I've taught martial arts for a long time, but I also have a teacher. I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he was like, I need a website, but I have no idea what I'm doing. And he found out that I did websites, so he wanted to get some tips. So he was able to, as a person who doesn't know any code, doesn't know anything, he was able to, sign up for hosting. WordPress was there ready for him to go. He was able to install a couple plugins. And the funny thing is he got all that set up and ready to put content in, but he didn't know what content to put in. Thankfully I had already built martial arts websites and knew kind of what to put in there. And so I was kind of helpful in that area. But yeah, like the whole beauty of it is that it's easy enough for somebody who doesn't know how to code to come in and be able to do stuff. And that's part of what the WordPress full site editing is all about, right? Like we used to just have like this area where you could edit the content, but you had to have a theme where you could have the header and the footer and all those kinds of things. But now with full site editing, you can actually say, I want to edit the theme header, or I want to edit the footer, or that kind of stuff. And you can do that using the same editor that you normally use to edit your content. So that's cool. That wasn't around when I was helping him with his site. So he had to install one of the builder plugins that, makes that easy. And I've got a neighbor who's recently started, he's transitioned from being in real estate essentially to becoming a programmer. And so he's kind of been making that transition. And so he learned, he wanted to get into the depths of it and really just be able to build stuff, come up with an idea and make it happen. But he wanted to go beyond what the average person could do with it, obviously. But we kind of started him at that point where you use a builder and you do all these things. But he also had learned HTML and CSS. And so if a customer said, we want to do XYZ, your average person would have no idea how to make the builder do certain things, whereas he could jump in and style things just so and all that kind of good stuff. So your standard HTML, CSS will take you a long way. I think most people, when they start learning WordPress, they start by installing it, setting up plugins and doing things that way, and then kind of slowly working their way backwards to the core of WordPress. So it starts out, somebody wants to tweak a theme. They're like, I want to change this color or this thing, but the theme doesn't have an option for that. So then they have to go in and they know a little HTML, a little CSS, so they can go in there and change those things. And then along the way, they're looking at all the PHP template tags that WordPress has that handle the different things, and they start to get a little bit familiar with them. And then they slowly start fiddling with those and looking things up online or something. And then before you know it, they're considering making their own plugin and, writing PHP for that. And it used to be that all WordPress developers were just PHP developers that knew how to work inside WordPress. But now with a lot of the changes that have been happening in WordPress, there's a much bigger focus on the JavaScript and React side of things. So interestingly, for WordPress, it's been a lot of the plugin developers have been around for a long time. Some of them have dropped off because they don't want to they're PHP developers. They don't want to do JavaScript. But then you get a bunch of other people who come in and they're really good at JavaScript, but they have no idea anything about PHP. And so they're working on stuff. So it's not very common that you usually find someone does both. And I think what most people end up doing is going and finding an agency, and they end up pairing up the back end and the front end so that they can get everything done. But there are some kind of workarounds, like there's some tools like Advanced Custom Fields, which lets you create some custom blocks that normally would be in React, but you can do them in PHP. So some things like that I guess people have found ways around not having to learn the the JavaScript side. But people are trying to learn both sides, and there's plenty of people that do. But more commonly, I think everybody kind of finds a focus and drills in on that.
Okay. That's interesting. So React seems to be a little bit more prominent in WordPress. Can you share maybe an example of, I guess, a common example of where people would integrate React into WordPress? And that's, it's going to create a little bit more overhead. So where does that bring an advantage? What kind of application?
So just a little bit of history. So WordPress originally used to use something called TinyMCE, which is like a little JavaScript based like content editor in the admin area. So you could edit your content, you save it in the database, and then it just renders it on the front end, whatever's in there. And so it would let you do some basic stuff and it'd manage that HTML for you. But, simple things like putting two images side by side is super complicated, right? Like you kind of have to know HTML to even make that happen inside of what used to be the old, or what they call the classic editor. The new editor, which is codenamed Gutenberg, or the WordPress block editor, it is entirely built on React. So if you want to create a custom block that other people can use, you pretty much have to build that in React. Now, they have a block built into WordPress, which is called a shortcode block, which was kind of the more traditional way that plugin developers would allow people to do custom things within that TinyMCE editor. Is they would put these little brackets and they'd have some sort of like kind of HTML-esque syntax, but they would have like pretty in-depth functionality usually associated with that. So like you could have this little string that would essentially represent a slider, for example, on the front end of a site, and it might pull from different content type in WordPress and output those things, or so that was kind of the normal way of doing things, and it was all PHP based. It was kind of annoying for people who were using the plugins because they would have to look up the documentation on the shortcodes on the plugin's website every time they wanted to change something, right? Like most developers didn't have any documentation on location in the admin area where they could learn those things. The nice thing about the block editor is that you click on the block and it gives you complete just UI inputs for all the different aspects. So whether you want to pick content type, some piece of content from somewhere else on the site, or you want to, do some advanced query, or you want to change the number of columns or change colors or anything like that, like that's all built in. So from a user standpoint, it's a wonderful thing. From a developer standpoint, if you want to do it and do it right, you got to do it in React. So
I think I would enjoy WordPress development more nowadays with that built in. Big fan of React. That's interesting. You're giving a few different avenues of kind of what you can pursue. So essentially, I think I just want to make sure I understand. So a lot of people, when they start with WordPress, they essentially kind of learn to just do a lot of things with plugins and probably an editor, a plugin that's an editor, or something that's built in to be able to do a little bit more with their pages, right? And then as they get more comfortable with that, maybe they want more customization, or they just want to understand WordPress more. They start then diving deeper into the actual code, into potentially PHP code, or they dive into JavaScript and React specifically. And so it almost like, for me, I like this style of learning, and I like to progress into more complicated topics when the need is there, where it's almost kind of different than like with traditional software engineering positions. Like, I think it's a really good idea to get the fundamentals down first and then dive deeper. And it's, you know, it's almost like in the very beginning, you're not necessarily building anything that's going to be prominent, or you could build little stuff to practice what you're learning, but it's a big emphasis on the fundamentals, where it's backwards with WordPress. I actually like that style of learning. I guess my question is, if people want to get paid as a full-time WordPress developer, do you feel like it's really easy to get a position being able to set up a WordPress site with plugins and essentially some editor and just put some things on a page? Or do they really need to dive into PHP? Do they need to dive into JavaScript? What gets them hireable?
So yeah, I would say there's a couple different options there, right? So like, if you're just trying to start your own business and take side projects and turn it into full-time job doing work for customers directly, there's a lot of people who go the no-code approach and then, you know, slowly learn stuff, and you know, that but I think most people that have gone down that path and made it business, what happens is they get too busy doing these kind of no-code websites that they don't have the time and effort to put into actually learning the more in-depth things that would earn them more money. So I think the people who are really good at business processes and like just generally like, you know, piecemealing things out and you know, getting it done, are more likely to do that. I think the people who are really interested in learning to code, they're probably going to want to, at some point, at least get a job with an agency or a small, you know, some sort of small agency where they can pick up some skills and get paid at the same time. Yeah, a lot of agencies have so many different approaches. So I've seen agencies where most of what they do is actually the no-code stuff, but then they do have other projects where they have need of more in-depth knowledge. And so a lot of people who go work at those types of agencies, you know, they could have built out some stuff and got a little bit of experience with the no-code approach, and they can continue to do that at that particular agency. But the growth opportunity there are other projects where they will need to know more, and there were people there who will teach them. So while you could go to a boot camp and spend $20,000 in 12 weeks or whatever and try to find a job after that, and maybe your boot camp even guarantees you a job, you know, you could put a little effort in up front. Usually you should be able to land a low-level position at one of these types of agencies and to progress kind of the next level. But yeah, because I've known some people that literally just knew HTML, CSS, and then went and worked in the agency, you know, because they could always start them out basic styling and doing that kind of stuff, and then slowly work them into PHP. My brother actually started out working as a IT professional who, you know, fixed printers and computers and stuff, and ended up learning HTML. He actually got into Magento, then he got into WordPress. So I think that's a lot of people's stories when they go work at agencies. But if you do have a lot more kind of like technical knowledge under your belt, you know, typically, you know, your average person is going to have more knowledge of either JavaScript or PHP. So they kind of choose the front end or back end approach. And I think, you know, there's plenty of like junior PHP positions or junior JavaScript positions. Interestingly, WordPress developers, if you get a job where the title is WordPress developer, the pay is actually less than if you get a job as PHP developer or JavaScript developer. Because there are so many people using WordPress and learning it and trying to code and do everything in WordPress. And they didn't just start like learning PHP and then going from there. It's interesting how, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Yeah, but it's interesting that that people have that,
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing. So PHP's been around for a long time. PHP's been around for a very long time. And, if you look at like PHP versus, PHP versus Python, I do think Python's generally going to pay a little bit more. But there are a lot of applications in PHP that still exist today. And it's highly due to WordPress being so prevalent as well. I know a lot of people, I don't talk about WordPress a lot, but I do know a lot of people do want to get into WordPress development. And a lot of like people with an entrepreneurship spirit too, that kind of started to dive into it a little bit deeper. But there are a lot of people that want that position. And I do think correct me if I'm wrong, but like if we're talking about like a traditional front-end software engineering position that's very heavy into JavaScript fundamentals and React and like deep into CSS, I think the learning curve is a little bit less getting into a WordPress developer position. And so it's more accessible and people can dive into it a little bit quickly. And quite frankly, if you have an entrepreneurship spirit, you could try to build a business. You could try to push out kind of just a basic product and pricing model, or like maybe it's just a static content site where you're putting ads on the website where you have affiliates or stuff like that, or it's a front-facing website for your business and it just brings in traffic. There are so many different use cases for WordPress, but it seems like it's a little bit lower paying and very much more accessible. So I think more people should consider that position. And sometimes people get too hung up on like, I need to get this official back-end engineering position when there's like so many other coding opportunities where you're still trying to solve problems with code. And when I dove into WordPress and my company switched over, I was one of those people where I wanted to focus way more on JavaScript, and what you're talking about with the plugin situation where JavaScript was much more prevalent, React is much more prevalent. Maybe I missed it, but like 7 years ago, that wasn't the case, not as much. But WordPress development, like there's still a learning curve, and you have to, in my opinion, I think it's really beneficial to learn PHP and get comfortable with it. WordPress is built off of PHP. You're still learning like solid programming skills. Hopefully the course is good and gets you a good solid foundation, but I don't know. I think I'm just ranting at this point, but I do notice a difference in salaries. But I still think it's, an actual programming position, and I don't think you should just exclude it. So because there's that difference, there's a WordPress developer title that's going to pay less. For people that want to try to avoid that, but still want to start with WordPress development, or niche, I don't know, maybe they niche down. What's your advice to people to try to bump up their salary as much as they possibly can when they're becoming a WordPress developer?
Well, I think when you're first getting into it, because the pay is lower, there's more developers doing that kind of thing. It is easier to land those positions than if you went after a strict PHP or JavaScript position. Tell me your question again.
You're good.
I started heading down, but then I got off track there. So what was it?
Well, it was a long rant. That's why. But essentially, so it almost sounds like you that expectation should be realistic, and you might start out with a lower pay. Would you say? Let me change my question. Would you, for people that do want to bump up their salary, they get into WordPress development, would you recommend that they do double down on PHP? They do double down on JavaScript? Should they try to mix both? It's going to take longer to learn two different languages. you know, what's your recommendation? Yeah, for those people.
Yeah, so a lot of people will get confused when they try to learn more than one language at a time, especially if they're just starting, right? So, and even like doing PHP and WordPress, it gets confusing because you're like, well, what's PHP and what's WordPress functions? Like, how do I know where one starts and the other ends? So there's a lot of that happens. So I think it's definitely important to dive into one and learn it well. You know, and there's the shortcomings of like PHP and WordPress code getting mixed up in someone's mind, but then there's also the, you know, same thing could happen in JavaScript, and you have to learn a billion build tools and all those kinds of things as well. So either way, it's a steep learning curve, but I think the unique opportunity that these WordPress positions provide is that you get that opportunity to sit alongside other people who maybe they don't specialize in WordPress. Maybe they specialize in PHP or they specialize in JavaScript. And then you're coming in with just enough WordPress knowledge to try to piece the two together, right? But, you know, at the end, I think you come away, you know, from that first position as having a better idea of which direction you want to go, and having probably gotten at least 6 months down that road of really learning that thing well. So your next position, you know, you'll be able to say, like, this is my focus. This is what I do. This is how I can help. And so it'll be more likely you get a higher pay. And I think once you kind of get to that point where you're very comfortable with, you know, whatever section that you choose to pursue, you know, eventually you're gonna start to expand that, probably to learn more kind of full stack. You know, maybe even learn some edge computing or some like other random things along the way. But yeah, I think it's a good opportunity for people to kind of to dive in and to actually work alongside people. So I had this interesting opportunity so I started working with this guy. He was kind of my code mentor, kind of got me out of just, well, here's the thing. So I do want to say, for all the people out there who are entrepreneurial and maybe don't want to just start with a position, or maybe they don't feel like they can do that, it's important, obviously, that you're able to get clients. And most people who are developers aren't very good marketers, and vice versa. So chances are you're going to get started. You might find a person or two who wants to have you do some projects, but those projects are going to be kind of slow coming. So what I found, my personal experience, was that if I connected with 3 agencies that needed some help with overflow work, then I could not have to go hunting projects all the time. And as long as I do a good job with the agencies, they keep sending me work. So that's kind of where I was. And then I met this guy, and he would, I'd actually just put out my first, well, I had put out a couple WordPress plugins that were just like learning things that did really stupid stuff, like, I don't know, order things by word count. But I created my first real big plugin in WordPress that it got 300,000 downloads, and, you know, it took off. So I gave a presentation at my meetup about this, and a headhunter found me and connected me with this guy who's, you know, he went to Georgia Tech and he got his degree in computer science, and, you know, now he's doing enterprise projects for people. And so I connected with him and started working with him on some stuff. And it was interesting because, you know, he was doing a lot bigger projects. And so one of the interesting opportunities was he had enough connections with enough bigger agencies that I actually went and spent about 6 weeks on site at most of the major agencies here in Atlanta, and got to kind of experience the culture and see how they worked. You know, some of them were very different. And just being able to have kind of those types of experiences where you're actually working with other people even if you are an entrepreneur and kind of doing your own thing, you can make those connections with agencies, and they almost always need the help. You just have to be confident in what you know and sell them on it, and you can do well. So
I like it. Okay.
Well, I was going to say, just get back to the pay question. You know, obviously, the more you know, the more you get paid. Like, I think if you started out like CSS and HTML, you're probably looking at $20 or less on average. And then once you're going to get either more JavaScript or more PHP, you're probably looking at more like $40, maybe $50 an hour. But if you know both, you're probably looking more like $90 to $100 an hour. And, you know, for a while there, I was billing out at $125 an hour. So like, people are willing to pay it if you know what you're doing, and they know and trust that you can do everything in one stop, right? Like, I can build the JavaScript side, I can build the PHP side. Yeah, I think as far as pay goes, that's probably the best thing you can do is to round out your knowledge of kind of all of the things. But, you know, if you're really, really good at PHP to the point that, you know, you put a normal PHP developer to shame, then you could probably get paid pretty well that way too. So,
yeah, I think that's good advice. And even just your initial advice, I thought that was a good caution, because I think outside of WordPress as well, so many aspiring developers, they just want to learn everything just to get that first high paying position. It's a perfect, ideal position, right? And I hope they get it. Most of the time they don't. And I think starting off and getting your foot in the door, and I love the idea, even if you have an entrepreneurship spirit, you know, just help with overflow work, you know, connect with agencies, connect with other people. And especially like, you mentioned something important. Usually, you know, marketing, usually, you know, development, you usually don't know both. And I think even pairing with people that can supplement with the knowledge that you lack, especially if you have an entrepreneurship spirit, that can be very helpful. But yeah, so almost like learning PHP and JavaScript, or like really learning PHP or really learning JavaScript, kind of just sounds like give yourself time with that. The money will eventually come. But just kind of getting your foot in the door, you had mentioned, it's like, then you can start, you know, get a year into the position, then you can start getting a feel. What do I want to focus on next, right? And maybe learning 2 languages at once is going to be a bit overwhelming. So maybe you can figure that out, figure out the path. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. If people like, I guess I'll ask one more question. If people wanted to get started learning WordPress, do you feel like there are any courses that they should learn or pick up? Would you recommend one?
So for the JavaScript side, Zach, I'm trying to remember his last name. Zach Gordon, I think he has JavaScript for WordPress.com, I think it is. And he's got a whole bunch of really, really good JavaScript courses. It's almost like a boot camp. You know, you learn one thing after the other, and, you know, you've got a community, like a Slack community, people that you can reach out to as part of that. And, you know, if you do all that and build out all those sample projects and all that kind of stuff, like, you'll be able to, you know, land a job doing that kind of thing at an agency somewhere. As far as the PHP side, I don't think there's a really good, clear, like, place I would say to go and learn that. Like, it's interesting because, again, my friend who started learning WordPress, and he was trying to get into PHP, he was like, well, I need to learn some basic PHP, so let me go find some sample problems and things to do. And he was he was showing me some of the stuff he was working on, and I was like, it's like, man, you must really love math. And he's like, no, those are all the PHP examples that there are. They're all math. There was no, like, you know, most of what we do in WordPress is like, okay, well, I've got a blob of text and I got it down to 40 words, and make sure that, you know, there's no, like, garbled HTML when we put it on the page, or a whole different problem set than most PHP training appears to provide. So personally, I can't recommend any particular thing. I think there are some good courses out there. And, if you do a boot camp or even just go to like a school where they teach that. Matter of fact, I taught for a while at Creative Circus. I taught a PHP course. We didn't do WordPress at all. And I think that was a really good experience for me, just to help me understand where people are coming from when they're trying to learn things. So it was relatively simple to teach someone straight up PHP. But as I've tried to teach people WordPress PHP, it's been difficult because, like I said, like the magic of WordPress often will cover over the foundational things you need to know about PHP. And so then you kind of, you're not really good at PHP, but when you're done with that, right? So like, I think that's where I had a little bit of an advantage, is I focused on PHP first and then got into WordPress. So I think if you do get into WordPress, you should definitely take some time to do some raw PHP projects, even if they never, it's never something you're going to release. Matter of fact, the first thing I built, that website I was telling you about for martial arts, I stored all of the passwords in raw text in the database, which is not great. Matter of fact, WordPress was what taught me that I should hash these passwords. I was like, wait a minute, what are they doing here? How do I know what the password is? So, I did a lot of things that were not very secure or, the best way of doing them, but I made it happen in PHP and I figured out the basics. And I think having the clear understanding of that as you're trying to get into WordPress PHP, it's going to give you at least a clearer line of where WordPress starts and, where PHP starts. So
I like it. I really like it. Well, if anyone, is watching this on YouTube and you have any recommendations for someone that wants to learn WordPress PHP, feel free to suggest it in the comments. It sounds like it's a little bit of a trickier path to try to find the right course, but it sounds like there are courses out there. Yeah, I think this is all really good advice. I appreciate it. Because I do think more people should consider this path. And you might really enjoy it, especially, I'm telling you, I think if I would, so I have an entrepreneurship spirit, and if I would have followed that and pursued that at a much earlier age, I probably would have picked up WordPress, because I built a web hosting company when I was 18, and just even learning everything I needed to learn to get that website up, I feel like I could have done everything in WordPress. It would have been easier. And I just wanted to create a company at the time. I didn't know I would really enjoy software engineering, so, it worked out. But yeah, I think WordPress, I think more people should consider it. Yeah, I think we dove into everything. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
There was something, but I think I forgot it. So
Oh no. What was the plugin that you created that got like 200, 300,000?
Yeah, it's, I'm trying to make it go away at this point, but it was called Promotion Slider.
Oh, you shouldn't have said it if you're trying to make it go away.
Yeah, well, it is being removed as we speak due to some security issues, because I haven't updated it in almost 8-9 years.
Okay. Don't download
which
it.
Makes sense. But yeah, like that was some of my early code, and of course, any code you've written 6 months ago is old code. So stuff you've written 8-9 years ago, yeah, it's not really worth going back to and trying to update. But it was a good experience.
Yeah, that is a really cool experience. All right, cool. Yeah, Mike, I really appreciate you coming on. If people want to reach out to you and anything else you want to shout out, where can people reach you?
Yeah, so my website is wpscholar.com. You can find me on Twitter as WPScholar. I'm also on WordPress.org as WP Scholar. So pretty much if you Google WP Scholar, you should find me.
It's easy.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, seriously, Micah, thanks so much for coming on and diving into this with me. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment below. Any of these topics that we're touching that might not be like traditional software engineering, we can dive further into them. We can invite more guests on, kind of just trying to get a feel for, what you guys are aiming for. But yeah, Micah, thanks so much for doing this.